Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the questions heading into spring and some of the teams that are under a lot of pressure heading into the 2024 season. But now it's time to talk conference title odds because FanDuel recently released their odds for the 2024 season, and there are a lot of interesting takeaways from it that I want to get to. And we'll start with the ACC. We'll go through the four big conferences that remain after the Pac-12 dissolved a year ago. But the ACC is very interesting this year. I think there are a ton of teams that have a chance to jump in, but at the end of the day, the two top teams are no different. Clemson and Florida State are setting the pace at plus 280. I think both those teams are going to be very good this year. I'm a little surprised Florida State isn't just a little bit above Clemson, but can't argue with that. I mean, Clemson has always been in the conversation, so I think it makes a lot of sense. And then they're followed up by Miami at plus 450 and then Louisville at plus 470. So two teams that can definitely make some noise. Cam Ward obviously coming over to Miami is a huge help to them. And Louisville coming off that year where they went to the ACC title game. Still a lot of energy around there, a great transfer portal class. So a ton to look forward to. And then there's quite the drop-off. And then you get to North Carolina State, SMU, Virginia Tech, some other teams that could make some noise. As I said before, Stanford is all the way at the bottom. And I don't think they will make it all the way to the top. I'll be totally honest. So we won't waste too much time on them. But there is a chance that this is one of the more interesting conferences in the country because we know that Florida State and Clemson are up top. We know that those are the teams to beat pretty much every year right now in the ACC. But we don't necessarily know that Florida State is going to be able to replace all the guys that they have to replace. We don't necessarily know if Clemson is going to continue to fall, if they're going to be able to right the ship over the last couple of years. So if those things happen, if Florida State does have kind of a drop-off from a year ago, if Clemson continues to fall like the last couple of years, the door's open for teams like Miami, NC State, Louisville, all these teams that are just on the outside looking in that could definitely make some noise. And Miami and NC State are the main teams that I'm watching kind of from the lower levels of this conference to kind of make a run at the title possibly. And then another team a little bit off the beaten path, a little bit further down the list is Georgia Tech, mainly because of Haynes King. I think with him returning and the knowledge that he has of the playbook and his ability to run it, as we saw last year, all very, very good and all make him a super big asset for Georgia Tech. So although there is a ton of talent on these other teams, although, Georgia Tech will not be the most talented team in the ACC by any means, they might have the quarterback that has the best handle on his offense. So when you have that, you can do a ton of things. So I think the ACC is very interesting. I think there's a ton of teams that can make runs, but at the end of the day, it's Florida State and Clemson and then everyone else for the most part. And then the Big 12. This is what I think is going to be the craziest conference a year from now. I think we have Utah leading the way at plus 340, followed very closely by Kansas State at plus 360. Those are the two teams that I talked about a second ago. Those are the two teams that have a very, very good chance of being at the top of the conference. And then they're followed up by some very fun teams. Kansas all the way up at third in the conference at plus 650. A team that is very interesting to watch. Jalen Daniels coming back for another year is huge. And then you have Arizona at plus 750 and Texas Tech at plus 850. All three of those teams can make some noise, but some things got to break their way. There's no doubt about that. But this league really goes 10 deep until you see a very steep drop-off in odds. So this is obviously a very deep conference. We have West Virginia at plus 1900, and then you have Colorado all the way down at plus 4,000. So that's really the big drop-off, but that's at 10 and 11 in the conference. So there are a ton of teams that can make some noise. I think the Iowa State Cyclones are a very interesting team. Rocco Becht is going to be among the best quarterbacks in the conference. This is a very strong quarterback conference, honestly, and he's going to be right in the thick of it because he's coming off a very, very solid year and will continue to build, I'm sure. And then Colorado is obviously a major dark horse for a number of things this year. Shedeur Sanders might be the best quarterback in the entire conference. I tend to believe he is. So with that, you can do a number of things, but he's got to have time to see the field before all hell breaks loose behind him. So I think the offensive line will be the defining factor there. And then UCF is another team to watch. I think they built up a lot of momentum last year under Gus Malzahn, and I think they can possibly take that into this year. So I think the Big 12 did a really good job replacing two of their biggest brands in Texas and Oklahoma. Obviously, not necessarily the firepower that Texas and Oklahoma have, but it's going to be a super fun conference, and I can't wait to watch what happens out there. And then the Big Ten. Two of the big conferences are the Big Ten and the SEC. So let's start with the Big Ten. We have Ohio State all the way up top at plus 155, and then followed shortly by Oregon at plus 250. Then Michigan plus 460 and Penn State at plus 600. All these teams have a very, very good chance to make a run in the conference, but Vegas doesn't necessarily think that anyone else has a very good chance. I think this is a relatively straight up conference this year. Even though it's one of the more powerful conferences in the game, I think Oregon and Ohio State are setting the pace out there. I don't think there's any argument about that. And then you have Michigan and you have Penn State, and both those teams can make runs if Michigan's defense is who they usually are. Having Will Johnson back is huge. And then Drew Aller, if he can burst onto the scene at Penn State, there's a lot of things to like about that Penn State team. So definitely a team to watch. I think USC, as we talked about earlier, could definitely make some noise. A relatively easy schedule. Getting Michigan this year is probably as good a year as you can get them. So if they can win that game, the sky's the limit. And then Iowa's offense could always arise from the dead. Who knows? There's always that chance that Iowa's offense meets their defense and they become one of the big-time players in the Big Ten. It's just been a while since that happened. And then can Will Rogers bring Washington back up to the top after a year where a lot of people didn't necessarily expect a ton and they burst onto the scene? I think it's a lot like this upcoming year, so maybe they'll do it again. But let's jump into the last conference here, the SEC. And as we all know, Georgia's the team. They are the team to catch. Kirby Smart is the coach that I think everyone wants in college football. So Georgia leads the way at plus 185, followed by Texas at plus 300. Those are the two big ones. And then there's a slight drop-off, and then you have kind of two groups that are starting to form. Ole Miss, Bama, and LSU. Ole Miss at plus 65, and then Bama and LSU at plus 95. And then you have Tennessee, Missouri, and A&M. Tennessee at plus 1,100, Missouri at plus 1,500, A&M at plus 2,000. So all of those teams can make a run. Obviously, some teams lower on the list have some stuff that needs to break their way. So I think one of the major things that could break these teams' way is, what if Texas doesn't respond to the conference very well? Obviously, they have a lot of things going for them, but it's a very different world they're walking into in the SEC. So I think Texas, if they don't respond well to the new conference, the door is wide open. And it's wide open for guys like Missouri and Tennessee that can make a ton of noise. A&M, another team that has a ton of talent, bringing in a new coach in Mike Elko. So there's a lot to look forward to with all three of these teams. All three of these teams have a chance to make a run, but I think some stuff has to break their way, and I think Texas would be the first domino to fall in that. The SEC is I think it looks like it's kind of known from the outside. I think a lot of people are expecting Georgia and Texas to be the teams at the end of the day, but there are so many teams that have the chance to strike when the iron is hot and kind of get into the picture if some things go wrong. If, Georgia struggles a little bit with replacing some of the cornerback and safety talent that they've had to, and the wide receivers, and replacing Brock Bowers is no easy task. So a lot of things have to, break the way of Missouri and Tennessee and A&M and those types of teams, Ole Miss among them. But at the end of the day, if they do, all these teams are very, very good and very, very keen to strike. So I think there's a lot of teams to watch. Kentucky's another one that is off the beaten path, but if they can put it together, Mark Stoops can win a ton of games. So it'll be interesting to see how all of this comes to fruition. Obviously, these odds will change throughout the spring, so we'll definitely keep an eye on them. But right now, those are the things I'm watching. There's a ton of teams throughout every conference. I think the Big 12 will be the most off the walls, but the SEC will definitely give it a run for its money. So a ton to like about these conferences, but I think that's all the reactions I have, at least for the time being, on those odds. But we're going to take our final break here, and when we come back, it's Hot Take Thursday. And I think this one's a doozy. I think there would be a lot of people that don't necessarily agree with me too much, but I do have some backing for what I'm about to say. So stick around after this break. We will get into that.